Good morning. We saw in the last meeting how Paul had completed his studies as a doctor of the law, and we found out that he, born in Tarsus, was a Hellenistic Jew. That is, he was part of that large community of Jews that had spread throughout the Middle East. We will now discuss an event of which Paul, as recorded in the Acts of the Apostles, was a direct witness. The death of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. Paul, on one of his many trips to Jerusalem, either on holidays or for study purposes, must surely have heard about this new sect led by a certain Jesus, and then also about his inglorious end by dying on the cross. He will also have been informed that his disciples continue to preach his message. And Paul, at the height of his doctrinal training, probably already a member of the Sanhedrin, Israel's supreme religious body, was full of zeal. As he himself tells us in his letters, he viewed with suspicion this new sect that seemed out of line with Jewish orthodoxy. It was on one of his trips to Jerusalem, at least 3 years after Jesus' death, that he happened to witness the stoning of Stephen, one of the members of the Christian community. To understand what happened, we need to cast our minds back and think about how the very first Christians lived. They gathered to listen to the apostles, to share the Eucharistic bread together, but otherwise they were devout Jews like everyone else. They attended the temple, participated in the same feasts, made sacrifices. Everything took place as if in the context of the Jewish world at that time. In addition to the Pharisees and Sadducees, a new group of worshippers had been formed who had a peculiarity. They believed that the Messiah that all Jews were waiting for had actually already arrived, and that it was precisely that Jesus who had been crucified. We saw in the previous meeting how the Hellenistic Jews had various synagogues in Jerusalem, divided according to the region from which they came. In this way, they formed communities distinct from their native Jerusalem community. In one of these very synagogues, the one that gathered Jews from Cilicia and other regions, a lively discussion arose. It seemed in particular that Stephen, who had been elected deacon by the apostles so that he might take care of the services at the soup kitchen, wanted to break away from the firmer traditions of their faith. The discussion was so heated that Stephen was forcibly brought before the Sanhedrin for clarification of his position. In his defense speech, Stephen fearlessly expounded what he believed. He honored the law of Moses and the temple, but at the same time showed that these two realities had to be viewed in a completely new light based on the preaching of Jesus Christ. The divine law had become universal, now embracing all peoples. He also showed a different way of looking at the temple, in a more spiritual way. Stephen, in fact, quoted a passage from the prophet Isaiah, where he says, "Heaven is my throne, and the earth the footstool of my feet." He meant by this that the temple was no longer the exclusive place of God's presence, but that one could worship him intimately anywhere. As if that were not enough, he considered his fellow countrymen traitors, slayers of the Jesus whom Moses had foretold as his equal prophet. It was too much. Some fanatics did not wait for the Sanhedrin's judgment, but taking Stephen by force, took him outside the walls and stoned him to death. Paul was with them and consented. After Stephen's death, many Hellenistic Christians, they were in fact the ones who mostly adhered to Stephen's approach to the new faith dispersed out of Judea to various cities such as Damascus or Antioch. Peter and the other apostles for the time being were not disturbed, because they actually continued to observe Jewish customs. That event was very significant for Paul. He understood the danger of that sect, had obtained permission from the Sanhedrin to persecute the followers of Jesus. He focused particularly on the Hellenistic Jews, because that was precisely where the majority of Stephen's followers lurked, as we have seen. He immediately thought of reaching Damascus, where one of the largest communities of Jews lived. From Jerusalem to Damascus was a 7 to 10 day journey on horseback. Probably Paul and his helpers went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and then up along the Sea of Galilee and the upper reaches of the Jordan River, thus reaching the Golan Heights. It was here, at the gates of Damascus, that the event that changed Paul's life took place. But we will see this in the next meeting.